our journey brought us to its final destination, Japan. To understand the future landscape of global trends, we're diving into the insightful world of Japanese government documents. There's a wealth of information available, but I've focused on three key reports from influential ministries: the Cabinet Office, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Defense. I believe these reports will offer unique perspectives and insights compared to what we've seen from other countries. Join me tomorrow as I bring our exploration of future global trends to a close. And as always, stay safe.
All right, so we're diving deep today into how Japan is viewing these future global trends. And you sent over a really interesting set of reports from Japanese government sources spanning the last couple of years. We're talking actual think tanks and policy documents.
Oh, wow.
So we're going right to the source here.
Yeah, it's smart to go to the source material because so often the global conversation gets filtered through other lenses.
Exactly. And, knowing you're already deep in this area, we're going to go beyond the headlines and really unpack some of these nuances of Japan's outlook. And one thing that struck me right away was just how much Japan's history and its position in Asia shapes their strategic thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that you see in these reports is how aware they are of the shifting power dynamics in the world. And in particular, the rise of what we call the global south.
Right.
In fact, one report actually cites India's GDP surpassing the UK's in 2023
Oh, wow.
as a symbolic representation of this change.
It's not just symbolic, though.
Right.
It's they're pointing to events like India hosting the Voice of Global South Summit and the expansion of BRICS. I mean, these are concrete actions by nations that are choosing to operate outside of these traditional Western-led alliances.
Yeah, and that's what makes Japan's diplomatic strategy really interesting.
Okay.
Because you can see they're not clinging to the G7 as the only avenue for global engagement. They're really actively looking to build partnerships with these emerging powers, even in cases where values might not perfectly align.
Right. They seem especially focused on the Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah.
This concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific, or FOAP, keeps popping up.
Yeah.
It's clearly a cornerstone of their foreign policy. But I'm curious, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, Prime Minister Kishida actually outlined a new plan for FOIP just last year in 2023.
Okay.
And what I find interesting about it is how much he emphasizes dialogue, equal partnership, a kind of people-centric approach. It's almost a direct contrast to the idea of just building up military force in the region.
Right. It sounds like they're trying to create a more inclusive and cooperative framework.
Yeah.
But let's be realistic. They're also facing some pretty serious security challenges.
No, for sure.
Especially from China and North Korea.
Yeah.
How do those factors play into their FOIP strategy?
Well, I don't think they're naive about the security landscape.
Yeah.
FOIP isn't about ignoring those challenges. It's about building a network of partnerships to address them.
Yeah, the reports specifically highlight the importance of that Japan-U.S. alliance, but also partnerships with Australia, India, South Korea, even the EU and NATO. It's like they're trying to build a coalition of nations committed to maintaining stability in the region.
Exactly. And it's not just about military cooperation either.
Okay.
They're also emphasizing what they call economic security. And the 2023 report from the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry actually frames this as a core pillar of their diplomacy.
Okay, so help me unpack this a little bit, because I know you've been diving deep into this concept of economic security.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean for Japan, and why is it so crucial to their diplomacy?
Well, I think it's essentially about recognizing that this economic interdependence can be weaponized.
Right.
Think about supply chain disruptions, sanctions, or even the threat of being cut off from critical resources.
Right.
Japan's acutely aware of these vulnerabilities.
Well, especially as an island nation so heavily reliant on trade and global markets.
Exactly.
It makes sense that they'd be prioritizing this.
Yeah, so you see this focus on strengthening their own supply chains, particularly for critical minerals and technologies.
Right.
But they're also advocating for international collaboration to counter economic coercion.
Yeah.
One report actually references the G7 leaders' statement on economic resilience and economic security as an example of this type of collective action they're looking for.
So they're learning from what the U.S. and the EU are doing, but also trying to forge their own path, it seems.
Yeah, and they're positioning themselves to take a leadership role on this. Don't forget, Japan is chairing the OECD Ministerial Council meeting in 2024.
Oh, right.
Which gives them a platform to really push this agenda forward.
This is all fascinating, but I'm also curious about how this broad strategic thinking translates into specific relationships.
Sure.
China is obviously a huge factor in Japan's calculations. What can we glean from these reports about how they're managing that relationship?
Well, I think there's a clear recognition that the relationship with China is both vital and incredibly complex. On the one hand, they acknowledge the economic and geopolitical importance of China.
Right. Hayashi's visit to China in 2023 seemed to underline that they're clearly making an effort to maintain that dialogue.
Yeah. But on the other hand, they're very upfront about the challenges. The 2023 Diplomatic Blue Book uses some remarkably direct language.
Oh, really?
Referencing attempts to change the status quo by force.
Wow.
And serious concerns about human rights.
This is a real balancing act.
Yeah.
They're trying to maintain what they call a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right.
While also firmly asserting their own interests and values.
It's a delicate dance, and to be honest, I'm not sure if they've fully figured out the steps yet.
Right.
But I do think these reports give us a sense of how they're trying to navigate this extremely important relationship.
Now, the U.S. is a completely different story. The Japan-U.S. alliance is consistently highlighted as the cornerstone of their security strategy.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just defense. They're deepening cooperation in emerging areas like technology, cyberspace, and even economic security. They specifically highlight the 2023 Japan-U.S. summit,
right,
where both countries committed to strengthening deterrence and response capabilities.
Right. And that summit also resulted in a joint statement on extended deterrence discussions and collaboration in cyberspace.
Right.
Two increasingly critical areas. It's clear that the Japan-U.S. alliance is evolving to meet these challenges of the 21st century.
Yeah.
But it remains a bedrock of Japan's foreign policy.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from the rise of the global south to the intricacies of FOIP and economic security.
A lot.
What's your main takeaway so far? What's the big picture message that Japan is trying to send with these reports?
I think for me, the overarching theme is that Japan is actively shaping its future in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and uncertain. They're not passively reacting to events. They're proactively engaging with them, building partnerships, and pushing for a more stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific region.
And they're doing it with a clear-eyed understanding of both the opportunities and the challenges that they face.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a strategic and pragmatic approach, and I'm really curious to see how this plays out in the years to come.
Me too.
But before we dive deeper into any specific issues, let's just take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far. What stands out to you, and what questions are we left with?
I think what strikes me is this sense of urgency.
Yeah.
This recognition that the world is changing rapidly and Japan needs to adapt. They're not content to simply maintain the status quo. They're looking to shape the future in a way that benefits their interests.
Right.
And contributes to global stability.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it raises an important question for me. How successful will they actually be in achieving these goals?
Yeah.
They're clearly ambitious, but they're also facing some pretty serious headwinds.
Yeah.
We've got a lot more to unpack, so let's dive back into these reports and see what else we can uncover.
Okay, let's do it. One thing that really jumped out at me as we were going through these reports, especially the ones from 2023, was just how much space is dedicated to North Korea.
Yeah.
It really highlights the level of concern they have about this ongoing threat.
Yeah, they don't pull any punches when describing the situation either.
No.
They cite the 18 ballistic missile launches in 2023, including the one that actually landed in Japan's EEZ, as evidence of the very real danger posed by North Korea's nuclear and missile program.
And it's not just the quantity of these launches that's alarming. It's the increasing sophistication of their technology as well. I mean, some of these missiles are capable of reaching the U.S. mainland.
So what's Japan's strategy for dealing with this? It seems like you're pursuing a multi-pronged approach.
Absolutely. Deterrence is clearly a top priority. They're working very closely with the U.S. and South Korea to strengthen their collective defense capabilities. And they're also advocating for continued sanctions to maintain pressure on the North Korean regime.
They specifically mentioned the historic trilateral summit at Camp David.
Right.
Which really solidified that cooperation between Japan, the U.S., and South Korea on security issues.
Right. And that summit sent a very strong message of unity to North Korea and to the region as a whole.
Yeah.
But they're not just focused on military measures. They're also committed to diplomacy, although they acknowledge that progress on that front has been limited.
The abductions issue is a particularly sensitive one for Japan,
Oh, absolutely.
and they haven't given up on trying to resolve it.
It's a powerful reminder of the human cost of North Korea's actions.
Yeah.
I mean, these abductions took place decades ago,
Right.
but for Japan, it remains an open wound.
Okay, so North Korea is this constant and pressing concern. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about China.
Okay.
It's clear that Japan sees the relationship with China as essential,
Mm-hmm.
but also incredibly challenging.
It's a real tightrope walk.
Yeah.
They're trying to balance the economic and geopolitical benefits of the relationship with their concerns about China's growing assertiveness and human rights record.
They're very candid in the diplomatic blue book about those concerns. They mention unilateral attempts to change the status quo in the East China Sea and South China Sea,
Yeah.
human rights concerns in Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and even the detention of a Japanese national.
Yeah, it's remarkably blunt language for a diplomatic document.
It is.
But it shows that they're not afraid to push back against China when they see it as necessary.
But they're also clearly trying to maintain a dialogue.
Right.
They highlight Foreign Minister Hayashi's visit to China in 2023 as a sign of their commitment to engagement.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act, and it's not clear if they've found the right formula yet.
Right.
But they're clearly trying to navigate this complex relationship in a way that protects their interests while also keeping the door open for cooperation.
Now, on the economic front, Japan is increasingly focused on what they call economic security.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean for them?
Well,
How does it factor into their foreign policy?
it's about recognizing that economic interdependence can be a double-edged sword. It can bring tremendous benefits, but it also creates vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Japan learned this the hard way during the COVID-19 pandemic when supply chain disruptions really exposed weaknesses in their system.
So they're taking steps to mitigate those risks. They talk about strengthening their supply chains,
Right.
particularly for critical minerals and technologies. And they're also working with like-minded nations to counter economic coercion.
The Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry report specifically mentions the importance of diversifying their supply chains and reducing their reliance on any single country.
Right.
They're looking to build stronger economic ties with countries like Australia and India,
Right.
which are seen as more reliable partners.
And they're not just acting unilaterally, they're also advocating for multilateral solutions.
Right.
They mentioned the G7 leaders' statement on economic resilience and economic security as an example of this kind of collective action.
They see economic security as a global issue that requires a global response, and they're positioning themselves to be a leader in this space. Their chairmanship of the OECD Ministerial Council meeting in 2024 gives them a platform to push their agenda forward.
Okay, so they're dealing with a hostile North Korea, a complex relationship with China,
Yep.
and the growing importance of economic security. What about their other key relationships? How does South Korea fit into their strategic thinking?
The relationship with South Korea is an interesting one. It's been fraught with historical tensions,
Right.
but there's been a noticeable improvement under the Yoon administration.
They specifically mention the agreement on the comfort women issue in March of 2023 as a sign of progress.
Yes.
This was a major sticking point for years,
It was.
and resolving it has really opened the door for closer cooperation.
And for those who might not be familiar with the issue, comfort women refers to the women who were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during World War II.
Right.
The agreement involved Japan issuing an apology and providing financial compensation to the surviving victims.
It was a long time coming, and it's really helped to improve the atmosphere between the two countries.
Absolutely. They're also working together to address the North Korean threat, and they're exploring opportunities for economic cooperation as well. The reports actually highlight the potential for collaboration in areas like semiconductors and renewable energy.
So shared security concerns and economic interest are really driving this rapprochement.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. It's a significant development for regional stability, and it shows that Japan is willing to put in the effort to mend fences with even its most difficult neighbors.
Now, what about Russia? That relationship has obviously taken a nosedive since the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah, they're very clear in these reports that they condemn Russia's aggression and that they see it as a serious threat to the international order.
Right.
They've been strong supporters of Ukraine, and they've implemented sanctions against Russia in coordination with the G7.
They also highlight the negative impact the war has had on their bilateral relationship with Russia.
Right.
Trade has plummeted, and many cooperative projects have been suspended.
Yeah, it's a major setback, especially considering they were making progress on resolving territorial disputes and building closer economic ties.
Right.
But they're drawing a line in the sand and making it clear that they will not condone Russia's actions.
It's a principled stance, even if it comes at an economic cost.
I think that's right.
But it's not just about big power politics. The reports also emphasize the importance of regional and multilateral diplomacy.
You're right. They talk about strengthening ties with Southeast Asian nations through ASEAN, and they're also actively engaged in international organizations like the United Nations and the G20.
They see this as a way to promote their interests, but also to contribute to global solutions for issues like climate change development and global health.
They're really emphasizing this idea of a rule-based international order, and they see themselves as a champion of that system.
It's a fascinating contrast to the more transactional approach we see from some other countries.
Yeah.
Japan seems to be taking a longer-term view, focused on building institutions and norms that will benefit everyone in the long run.
It's a more idealistic approach, but it also reflects their understanding of their own vulnerabilities. As a nation that's heavily reliant on trade and international cooperation, they have a vested interest in a stable and predictable global order.
It's also interesting to see how they're leveraging their soft power. They talk about cultural diplomacy, educational exchanges, promoting Japanese pop culture as a way to build relationships and enhance their standing in the world.
They're very aware of the power of these intangible assets. They see it as a way to connect with people on a human level and build goodwill that can transcend political and economic differences.
It's a smart strategy, especially in an era where information and ideas are flowing more freely than ever before.
It's a reminder that diplomacy isn't just about formal agreements and negotiations. It's also about building relationships, fostering understanding, and finding common ground.
We've covered a lot of territory here, but we've only scratched the surface of these reports. There's so much more to unpack.
So much more.
From their specific policies on issues like climate change and development, to their vision for the future of technology and innovation.
And we haven't even touched on their domestic challenges.
Right.
Like their aging population and their efforts to revive their economy.
Right. Those are important factors that will shape their foreign policy as well.
Yeah.
But for now, let's shift our focus back to you, our listener.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on what we've discussed so far?
What insights have resonated with you the most?
What questions are you left with?
What aspects of Japan's foreign policy do you find most compelling or most perplexing?
We've spent a lot of time dissecting Japan's strategic approach to some pretty, weighty issues,
Yeah.
Security threats, economic complexities, some really delicate diplomatic maneuvering.
For sure.
But as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on something that really struck me.
Okay.
Running through all of these reports, even the most sober assessments of global risks, is this persistent thread of optimism.
Right.
This belief that Japan can actually play a role in building a better future, not just for themselves, but for the world as a whole.
And it's not just wishful thinking either.
Right.
They're backing up this vision with concrete actions and a willingness to invest in finding solutions for some of the toughest global challenges we face.
For example, they highlight their commitment to promoting universal health coverage. The 2022 white paper from JICA,
Right.
the Japan International Cooperation Agency, goes into detail about how they're sharing their expertise and resources to help countries build stronger healthcare systems.
And it's not just about providing aid either.
Right.
They're actively promoting sustainable development models. Their quality infrastructure initiative emphasizes investing in projects that are both economically viable and environmentally responsible.
They're also stepping up their efforts to address climate change. The 2023 report from the Ministry of the Environment outlines these ambitious goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and their commitment to investing in renewable energy.
And they're taking a leadership role in international climate negotiations. They're pushing for more ambitious targets.
Right.
And working to build consensus among developed and developing countries.
I was also really intrigued by their focus on science and technology.
Yeah.
They see innovation as a key driver of progress, and they're investing heavily in areas like artificial intelligence, robotics, and biotechnology.
They're particularly interested in using technology to address social challenges. They have specific initiatives like the Society 5.0 program,
Right.
which aims to create a super smart society
Wow.
where technology is used to improve people's lives.
It's a really forward-looking vision, and it shows that they're not just reacting to the present. They're actively trying to shape the future.
And they're not doing it alone either.
Right.
They're partnering with other countries, international organizations, the private sector, to make this vision a reality.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Japan's perspective on future global trends, I think the key takeaway for me is this. They're not shying away from the challenges.
No.
They're embracing them.
Yeah.
They see a world in flux, but they also see opportunities to build a better future.
And they're not just talking about it.
Right.
They're taking action. They're putting their resources, their expertise, and their diplomatic weight behind this vision.
And I think that's a really powerful message for all of us. The future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we create.
Yeah.
And Japan's example shows that even in a world facing some really complex problems, we can still choose to be optimistic. We can still choose to act, and we can still choose to make a positive difference.
Absolutely. Their approach is a reminder that even with all the complexities and uncertainties we face, there is still room for hope. For innovation and for collective action to build a better world.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive, but the conversation doesn't end here. What are your thoughts on Japan's vision for the future?
Yeah. What insights have resonated with you?
What questions are you left pondering?
What aspects of Japan's foreign policy do you find most compelling or most perplexing? We'd love to hear your perspective.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep engaging with these really critical issues because ultimately, the future is shaped by those who choose to participate in the conversation and take action.